Okay, we are reading The Biology of Kundalini by Jana Dixon. Today I am on page 61 and we're reading Pull from Skeletal Muscles. Okay, so yesterday we talked about heart expansion. That was an interesting one, eh? So she's now referring to her heart expansion of February 2007's full moon. She said, I realized I had not built up my body's nutrient resources enough. This is really important. Thus, the monthly heart expansions were literally drawing amino acids, arginine, glutamine, taurine, and glucose out of my skeletal muscles in order to fill the heart expansion. And because my reserves are inadequate, the rest of my frame goes into deprivation mode. I've also experienced that. I might even be experiencing that right now. I feel like I go through these phases where people tell me, oh, you look really good, you filled out, and then people are like, oh my gosh, are you eating? And I know, like, when I go through a rapid heart expansion, which happens almost every month right now, with the moon cycles, that I suddenly feel depleted. So I'm reading this again and I'm thinking, maybe that's what's going on and I need to take some amino acids. So frame goes into deprivation. Each heart expansion period would be accompanied with painfully weak arms, a sense of pain and weakness in the buttocks, fatigue, and grounding. I get the definite like weak arm pain stuff. So that's something that I've felt. I get the grounding sometimes, more like in the beginning. I turned my awareness on the big draw in my skeletal muscles and remembered that this has been happening every full moon now for 6 months or so at least. About 5 days prior to a heart expansion period, there was a drain on nerve energy, resulting in ticks and pulsations of muscles. Then, 3 days prior to full moon, I can feel the heart start to power up with associated loss of strength from the arms and glutes. Plus, I can feel what probably amounts to amino acids being removed from the skeletal muscles of the glutes, making them weak and sore. Gosh, I'm so glad I'm reading this again because I'm really resonating with some of this stuff. My theory is that the body is harvesting the amino acids glutamine and arginine and possibly taurine to convert the neurotransmitter glutamate, glucose, and nitric oxide in order to fuel the heart expansion around the full moon. So the full moon is a very strong energy and it's going to definitely do a lot. Of course, women, we're tied to the tides and currents, but all of us are actually affected by these cycles. So when we're getting new cosmic energy, it can definitely align through the full moon time. She says, March 2007 was a parasympathetic opening moon. It didn't suck the nutrients from my skeletal muscles, so that meant the nutrient saturation with my smoothies worked. However, it blew my cardio system so wide open that I had to spend a day in bed and have been on go slow for 5 days. It made me realize I now need to really build up the strength of my cardiovascular system with aerobics and running in order to withstand the fluxes and flows of the cosmos. I definitely feel that after I get flattened, my body is just like back on the mat, like doing some stretching, getting into a little bit stronger Kundalini action to get the cardio going. She says a silicon-rich diet is important to endure heart expansions as both in improving nerve transmission and increasing the elasticity and tone of the blood vessels. I also find catnip tea useful for helping the mind surrender, for psychological resistance to the expansion, which creates tension differentials. Wow, silicon. So I have really great nails right now. She's saying that, and I'm realizing I've had just such a much better time around this last full moon, even though it was intense. And I have been doing this, the Live brand Greens 2.0, and it's lots of greens, but definitely silica, definitely folate. It's really changed my hair and nails though, so this is super interesting. She says, by the late July heart expansion, I had saturated my reserves through nutrient-dense greens and superfood smoothies. So I only felt a little sleepiness rather than fatigue with the heart expansion. Same thing I just said. There was no sense of drawing of nutrients from the skeletal muscle. However, because the increased nutrition allows the heart to soar higher, I found I needed to moan and groan and use panting breaths to accommodate the largeness of the heart. So you're just in this as the heart is opening, right? You want to do that, and lying on the earth too helps you endure those heart expansions. So during the peak, we tend to flip from one mode to its opposite, but after many years, there's not such an obvious flip into contraction after opening, for you barely notice any descent within the background of permanent ecstasy and heart expansion. Although I do notice the contraction comes in one way or another, whether it's financially or a different way. The expansion contraction does affect your reality. She says, I found that in the later stages of the alchemy, I do not go into sympathetic drive for crucial, scary, or stimulating events, but into parasympathetic. Parasympathetic overdrive, as we've been speaking of in other videos, involves grounding, expanded blood vessels, great weakness in legs, slowness in moving, and the heart feels like it's falling to the ground. Remember, because you're just like in relaxation. Your parasympathetic is on overdrive and you're just like, This happens automatically, and the state will persist in direct relation to the subconscious charge generated by the stimulating or provocative event or cosmic influence. So if you have an event that stimulates the Kundalini, or the eclipse or a new moon or the equinox or all of that happening at once, strong planetary alignments can send you off. She says, this second half of 2007, I'm going through morning heart expansions where the heart is dropping into the enteric brain or the solar plexus. It is delicious, but laced with deep sadness of helplessness over our current human predicament. Oh boy, I definitely felt that. In the evening, the expansion lifts to more of the ecstatic side of the equation. At night, in bed, my heart wants to soar open to new heights, but each time it flexed, the guy downstairs would snore loudly. The opening heart loves whatever there is there. If there is grief or anger or fear there, the expanding heart melts sweetly into that. The heart solar expansion moves down into the solar plexus in the last few months of the year, coming up to winter solstice, and the enteric brain tells it like it is. The emotional solar plexus brain doesn't confabulate reality as the head can do, but presents us with the raw reality of our inner existence. Females tend to get weepy and whiny toward the end of a heart expansion period. Oh, don't we? Heart expansions tend to blow your expansive adaptive functioning, so loss of left brain faculty does produce some depression. It does. But there must be some specific chemistry with the aftermath of excessive heart opening, perhaps to do with serotonin levels, the loss of dopamine, and maybe reduction in norepinephrine. And perhaps after long exposure to endorphins, the amrita, a tolerance point is reached when the neuron reuptake mechanism is overwhelmed with neurochemicals, which creates a temporary neurotoxicity. And this produces the lack of brain function and the whining. I don't like this is happening. I don't want it to happen. Things are so hard. The world's so bad. Blah, 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 right? We all know how to whine. Why females whine more than males? She says, I don't know. Males must have different dopamine wiring or be more efficient at clearing their brain chemicals. Or perhaps they don't have heart expansions to quite the heart-rendering levels due to less oxytocin, which is possible. If large amounts of oxytocin are released during heart expansion, as in childbirth, then any deprivation of cuddling and intimacy is going to show up as a pretty major depression, because that touch really does help the body process. I noticed that parasympathetically expanded heart does tie so intimately into the social arm wiring that it is literally painful to not hug someone. Or it could be that the serum estrogen and testosterone levels, which determine whether one whines after heart expansion or not. Could be one of those two. Opening is hard work. Perhaps we just don't like to be opened beyond our comfort level when our adaptive faculties have gone offline. Ain't that the truth? Anyway, the moral of the story is to follow your cycles in association with the annual and monthly moon and sun cycles, and to prepare for your heart expansions. To maintain meta adaptation and higher testosterone, we need to be cardio aerobically fit. Then the exhaustive depressive downside of heart expansion will not be as extreme. You may not be able to run during a heart expansion, but run on the days that your heart is more normal in order to condition the heart and the brain toward more yang chemistry and mastery. As the solar heart grows during a peak heart expansion, you might notice waves of intense physical heat coming off of your heart, along with full body heating. Simultaneous with this heart heat wave, I also had intense heat arising from my shoulder joints. I'm actually feeling that now. That day I ate some cooked peanuts, and the next morning my shoulder joints were painful. So I recommend you stay clear from cooked, processed, or damaged fats during the extreme heating periods of heart expansion or active Kundalini in general. For these fats, just add to the oxidative load and contribute to inflammation and not transformation. As a general rule, the hotter the Kundalini heat we are experiencing, the more careful we have to be to not include cooked carbohydrates or trans fats in our diet, and to increase our antioxidant intake. So we are at the end of that section. This is not a long section to go into the next one, so maybe we'll go into a tolerance for bliss, because that sounds fun. She says the hardest thing to actually handle is the pleasure of our own emergence. The ecstasy of Kundalini occurs at a cellular level, as well as the extreme pleasure of love in the heart region. Various regions of the body, such as the left brain, the belly, the left side of the body, the pelvis, and sex organs, can also undergo periods of radical bliss satiation, lasting for days to a lifetime. A lifetime, she really said that. Lasting could be as long as your whole life, these bliss saturations. There's a feeling of saturation of the tissues with ambrosial honey through the veins. It is like constant lovemaking with God. During heavy bliss periods, the brain is lit up with the light of Kundalini, and you can see the biophotons lighting up in the irises of the eyes and illuminating the skin. Do you ever just notice someone's eyes are just twinkling and bright? During the parasympathetic stage of a heart expansion, the blood vessels are so open that blood pressure is lowered. So the arms lose strength, the movement's slower, and you feel pulled to the ground. You know, ever since my awakening, my early Kundalini awakening, I have noticed, even especially through practicing yoga for many years and teaching many years, that my blood pressure always registers below the normal range. But for me, that's normal because I feel I'm slowed down. And that's what she's talking about. Your parasympathetic is working more. I don't know. It's it slows you down. The Greek meaning of ecstasy is to stand outside of oneself. To stand outside oneself and thus turn subject into object is samadhi. Turn the subject into the object. Ecstasy means to stand outside the ordinary self through unification with the numinous or God via the direct experience of divinity. The experience of divine union cannot be translated into words, but it is the basis for all religion and spirituality all over the world. We can describe this ineffable event only in symbol or word and metaphor, and thus we create our religions and our myths. People have been trying to express the ecstasy of divine union ever since they first encountered it. Here are some of the words that attempt to describe that ecstasy. Grace, beatitude, blessed, delirium, ebullience, elation, enchantment, euphoria, exaltation of the cells, full gladness, gladfulness, complete, gone, happiness, heaven, inspiration, intoxication, joy, paradise, rapture, ravishment, rhapsody, trance, transport, twilight zone, scintillating transcendence. It's ironic that in the beginning of our adaptation to ecstasy, we can end up feeling like poor little me and isolated. So one ends up asking, well, just how is one supposed to deal effectively with ecstasy instead of suffering from the awesome power of so much pleasure? Even though all spiritual practice and religious motivation is a step in the ecstatic direction, nowhere are we told exactly how to tolerate the prize when we get it. I realize there is only really a problem if I try to stay as small as my normal egoic self. You see, that much energy and presence trying to fit into this tiny vessel of my defended, wounded self is what causes the angst of ecstasy. The small self tries to hang on for dear life as the current of bliss is blasting it away. As the years pass, our system can handle more bliss without reduction in brain function or loss of lucidity. The greatest spiritual challenge is engaging the bliss with the intent to let it wake us up rather than become less conscious. The ecstasy of the incarnation of presence is difficult if approached with an unconscious lack of piety or an ungrateful attitude. Like, why is this happening to me? Or I don't want to deal with it, or it's too much, any of that. It might be that each successive heart expansion period renders the ego less and less resistance to spirit's force simply through progressive loss of the habit of unconsciousness. The intensity of the pleasure literally commands surrender. And it is very apparent that conscious will must be actively engaged throughout the heart expansion period to accept both the pleasure sensation of ecstasy and the presence of presence with a big P in the body mind as well. Excuse me, I have an itchy nose. Pardon me. During such periods of rapid incarnation, we cannot simply passively open to spirit and be filled by it, but we must be actively bailing out in order to make room within us. Okay, so there's always stuff that has to move out of the way when you feel that energy coming in. You have to actively, you can't just receive, she's saying. Plus, we must apply conscious will to welcoming spirit's emergence. That is to end the internal violence and have a loving appreciation for spirit, our own included. Seeing the world and ourself with soft, loving eyes. Accepting ecstasy becomes therefore an agentic act of devotion and gratitude. In fact, devotion might simply be the act of allowing of ecstasy. It is when we meet spirit with hesitation, agenda, resistance, divisiveness, rebellion, lust, usury, or any other ulterior motive that the tension of extreme pleasure becomes intolerable. Makes sense? Just as when we greet another person with those kind of egoic attitudes, same thing. So if we welcome the spirit, if we welcome this ecstasy in our being, and we're not resistant, we're not questioning, and we're not trying to get something out of it, then it's not going to feel so bad, right? Where did I end? Oh, to avoid this, we must maintain the correct stance. To actively, voluntarily surrender to the pleasure of consciousness, to embrace it, and not back away from it or attempt to use it for lower purposes. If we are passive toward the enormous, overwhelming influx of love and light during ecstasy, then we will feel self-pity, even in extreme rapture, until we take up an active will in order to receive this unbridled pleasure. She says self-pity is not bad, it's just the weaker side of compassion. It's the first sensing of the harm or deprivation prior to taking up one's will to do something about it. If, however, you simply stay in self-pity as a general state, then you are stagnating the natural growth process and are living in bad faith. Calling this Kundalini force Dionysus is appropriate, she says, for it is like being taken over by a blissful spirit that is not interested in reading or writing or in maintaining a solid sense of self. It's only interested in being. One day I was just beginning to wimp, and then I remembered Dionysus. Dionysus is the ground of consciousness prior to the conditioned mind, called Apollo. On making this distinction conscious, I realized that when Dionysus turns up, one is just supposed to be the ground of consciousness and not try furiously to hold on to our conditioning or Apollo. For the way to achieve a higher, more capacious Apollo is by fully surrendering to a deeper Dionysus. If we hold fast to the 1% as the be-all and end-all of consciousness, we forfeit the other 99% of the vast reaches of awareness that constitute the sub and super of the ground of consciousness itself. Other than the obvious practical methods for metabolizing extreme chemistry such as breathing, circulating energy, which I talk about in some of my other videos, grounding, taking baths, drinking plenty of water and such, there is a need to widen the size of the vessel by circulating the energy to others. So, and sharing with others, right? If we try to keep the ecstasy contained within the narrow confines of our body and normal personality, well, we run into great difficulty. As soon as we make an effort to widen the circumference of self, then we have more room in which the energy can flow, and the pressure and isolation of extreme states of ecstasy are relieved. Anything is endurable if we widen the vessel enough. Though I'm still not brave enough to ask Spirit to bring it on, I can take all that you have to give. I remember that brings me to when I turned 29 and I was in India, and I was definitely feeling like high Kundalini vibes at that time. I was living, I mentioned this in another video, but I was barefoot all the time, walking barefoot. We were sun gazing every night. We were going to these clay baths and doing mud baths on our skin, and then rinsing them in the fresh water, and then swimming in the ocean and walking under the moonlight, and eating with our hands, and all of these things are very much, and we were, sitting and talking, and a little bit of ganja from time to time. And anyway, all of these things were conducive to the Kundalini awakening energy. And I can remember running out into the ocean under the full moon on my 29th birthday on the winter solstice and literally telling Spirit to bring it on. And I had no idea what I was even talking about then. I was having spontaneous poetry. I mean, I was in the height of the awakening, and I did not know how ungrateful that really was, because my vessel was not really knowing how to handle. I did end up from there coming back to India and going to yoga school, to the Bihar Yoga Bharati Yoga University, and studying there and learning about Kundalini awakenings and learning what was going on and learning how to manage it better. But I did put a lot on myself really early all at once. I did just dive my whole self in, and it took the rest of my life up till now. Now is 20 years later, where I'm really like working to integrate all the pieces that I ran after and gobbled up back then, because I thought, you know, I could just get it all in. You know, I didn't understand the whole process. So to be gentle with yourself is definitely a recommendation. Even if you've been doing this a while, still be gentle with yourself, because the process is a flux and flow. It's making sure that your physical body is attuned and can handle it. And so also, you know, there's cycles of getting really healthy and then maybe not eating as well, and then again, and sometimes we need to do that to flex and flow, especially if we've blown ourselves open really wide. We might need to regulate that. But just have compassion for yourself, take it as an easy pace, and nurture the self as much as possible. When you feel the need to surrender, lay down, do it. When you feel the motivation to move, do it. And try not to question or have self-judgment in the time that you're not in, you know, in the other time. If you're flat out, don't think, why can't I just get up and go? And if you're going, don't think, why can't I just be in that relaxed time? Just really take it as it comes the best you can. And yeah, so we are reading Biology of Kundalini by Jana, Dixon, exploring the fire of life. Loving this book. The next section that we'll read tomorrow is No Way Out But Through. This is a conversation I've had with people tons of times, where they're wondering, can't I get out of this? Can't I make it stop? I even made a video on my channel here under the Kundalini Queen. Can you stop Kundalini awakening? And she's basically saying you have to go through it. And it's one of those things, like once you begin your process of awakening, there really isn't any way to shut it off and make it stop. Like definitely you can go slow as you can, but you are going to have to deal with the symptoms that come along. So it's best to just know what you're in for and equip yourself for the journey. You know, it's like you are going to go on this backpack through the forest. Like it's the only way home. So what do you want to have in your backpack while you're walking through the forest? You know, like you don't want to go just with nothing. You don't want to nakedly walk through and just hope that the forest provides. I mean, sure, there'll be things you can use in the forest to provide on the way, but it might be better if you took a little preparation ahead of that journey. So thank you for joining me. I hope that you will join us again for the next read, and I hope you enjoy the other videos on this channel. Please leave me a comment if you have any questions or experiences you want to share, or you want me to talk about something in another video that hasn't been addressed yet. And if you would like a private session with me, I do work individually one-on-one to help you through your transformation, or just to give you a reading if you want to see what's going on. I do full system check-ins. You can send me an email message, stasiabliss@gmail.com, and otherwise we'll see you back here again. All right, much love.